So the last thing that I want to talk about in relation to this chapter is the Freedom of Information Act, and then we're also going to talk about some violations to privacy we experience on a regular basis. So the Information Act is an act that was passed to allow people to request data from the government. So this could be things such as emails between top-level officials or data that's collected for other purposes. The Freedom of Information Act, its purpose is to allow citizens to understand how the government uses data and what purposes it uses it for. Now, you would think maybe this data should just be immediately accessible and nobody should have to put in a request for it, but the Freedom of Information Act allows us to get access to data, and even some of that data which might be confidential, the confidential parts or top secret parts of that data will be blacked out so that we're not violating other policies we have in place with the government. Now, the Freedom of Information Act is primarily about the government on a federal level, but there are very frequently Freedom of Information Acts for state levels as well, which means that you can probably request data from institutions such as your state government or from your local state university, such as Tennessee Tech, uh, if there's data you would like to have. This information is usually processed, and there's certain requirements you have to meet about being able to actually request this data. However, once it's been requested, it can take some time for it to be distributed to the requester. Sometimes these requests are also denied for various reasons, and it's important to understand what those reasons are. Your book goes into a lot more information about what the Freedom of Information Act is, but the important part about it is that you're able to get data that the government has in order to understand how the government is using that data or what the government is doing in general, such as Freedom of Information Act requests regarding the data collected about whether or not the Patriot Act has been effective, right? So this allows us to analyze and critique our government off of data that they have that they might not otherwise want to disclose to the public. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about is violations to privacy that happen on a regular basis. So some of these things you might not consider to be privacy violations, but after we talk about them, hopefully you'll understand how that might be. So the first is telemarketing. So I'm sure many of you have gotten spam calls on your cell phones or on your home phones with your family. Now, telemarketing is basically this concept of cold calling people in order to maybe sell them a product, or sometimes it's to scam them about something else. These are considered violations of privacy because our number has been given out without our permission most of the time, and to these companies who then want to try to sell us stuff that we did not ask to be sold to us. So that is a violation of our privacy in terms of our data being exposed to a third party that we did not ask for that data to be exposed to. Another is TV commercials. Now, it's not just that TV commercials in and of themselves are a violation of privacy. No, this is more about the volume of TV commercials. And we can talk about this more in the sense of YouTube commercials as well, which is probably something you're all much more familiar with than actually having live TV commercials. So there's been a few attempts at trying to curb the invasion of privacy brought on by certain commercials, and the biggest one of those is the volume associated with these commercials. So if you're watching a very quiet, very serious show, right, and then when it cuts to black to go to an ad, and it gets very, very loud on the next commercial, think infomercials, right? This is considered an invasion of our privacy, a violation of our privacy. We have the volume turned up, possibly because the show is quiet or for other reasons, and then we're getting shouted at by our TV. This is considered a violation of our privacy, and you could even apply that same concept to commercials provided by YouTube. Now, another thing is drug purchases. So this is actually something that our government does uh, when you purchase certain drugs, and you can read more about the details of it, you have to provide an ID and other information to say that you are allowed to purchase it. Now, the reason why this happens is because sometimes those drugs are used as components for illegal substances, and the government wants to be able to track who's buying these types of substances in excess in order to see who might be producing these illegal substances. So this is a violation of our privacy because these are medicines, right? You would think that this kind of information might fall under a HIPAA protection, but it does not. And this is considered a violation of our privacy because it's both a violation of our financial data, of our purchase history, right, of our location, as well as what exactly we are buying and possibly an interpretation as to why. The last thing we'll talk about here is the TSA or the Travel Security Agency's body scanners. So some of you may have been to the airport in the last, I don't know, 10 years or so and seen these giant machines where you step into them, you have to raise your hands above your head, and they scan your body. It's basically like an x-ray. The idea behind this is supposed to be less invasive than a pat down by a TSA agent. However, this isn't necessarily true. A TSA agent, for instance, does have to pat you down, and the body scanner, so when they pat you down, they can only get surface level information. But with the body scanner, they're able to x-ray you and get different information about you, which could expose medical information, such as if you have a piece of metal in your body, such as a hip replacement or other kind of metal pin that might be in your body for various reasons. That exposes some of your medical history. It could also violate your privacy in other ways just by exposing that otherwise invisible portion of you to agents at a government level. So there's a lot of concerns that we have over the type of data that the government may collect and about how that data is used. We can see a lot of violations on a regular basis to our privacy, and this is becoming more and more true with things like social media, and where ads are shown to us based off of things we've looked up before, based off of people that we follow, based off of things that our family or our friends are interested in. And that provides a lot of information to a lot of companies, as well as to potentially the government in ways that we might not expect. It's also important to remember that even when the government itself isn't necessarily collecting data itself, it may ask for data from private organizations as a way for them to collaborate with these private organizations to get data that they want for potential crimes or other information that they think is important. A lot of times these private organizations do cooperate with these types of requests even when there is no warrant presented. So there's questions about whether or not this is appropriate for the government to be doing and for our private organizations to be doing as well. Your data may be exposed to more people than you realize just because of the way that the government handles and requests information from others. Remember to ask me any questions that you have in the Teams channel, and also do have that discussion on the national ID in the Teams channel as well. I'm really interested to hear what you all think about whether or not we should or should not have a national ID here in the United States.